strategies. I'm Betsy Brainerd. I'm the supervisor of early literacy with the Arapahoe Libraries. And with me today are my colleagues on the Child and Family Library Services team, Lauren Graham and Mary Cooner. We're here today to find out about cultural competency. What does that mean for us and for our children? How do we raise children who can comfortably navigate our increasingly diverse world? Fortunately, we have an expert with us today who can help. Janet Damon is a campus librarian for Denver Public Schools. She provides diversity and equity training for librarians and library systems in the area. She's been recognized as a library mover and shaker, and she's a recipient of the 2022 Reverend Dr. James A. Peters Humanitarian Award for her work to shape more inclusive communities through literature, nature clubs, and multiracial story times. She is also the co-founder of Afros and Books. She's an educator, a literacy advocate. I love that term. She blogs at Mix Mama, and she's very experienced in helping to lead conversations about race and cultural diversity, particularly using picture books as a discussion starter with young children. Janet will take questions at the end, but if you have them as we go along, you can just put them into the chat box. And it is private to the extent that only the librarian team and Janet will be able to see what you ask, so don't be shy. And know that we might hold your questions for the end, depending on where Janet is in her presentation. And now we're going to turn it over to Janet.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you so much for having me and for offering this beautiful space to engage in this critical conversation. Today, I'll start by just thinking about our values, our goals. I kind of had a delay there. So first, today's goals as we explore this topic is to ground ourselves in some research, thinking about the ways that children recognize and interpret difference. And then we're going to learn some ways to disrupt bias through these affirming stories and inclusive learning experiences. And then we're going to talk about how reading stories, and we're going to look at some titles that provide a strong foundation for belonging. So to start us off, I'm just going to model how I talk about my identities and how these are an entry point for me in today's conversation. I am a biracial woman. I'm Black and Korean. I'm the daughter of an immigrant, as well as the daughter of a proud Texan who endured Jim Crow segregation, and who is also the descendant of enslaved people brought to the United States from the continent of Africa. And during the course of my journey, I have experienced both the bias as well as the privilege that comes with my identities. And I'm very committed to ensuring that children know how to navigate a world where bias does exist, but also where the potential for collective care, shared humanity, and values brings us into balance and belonging with one another. And to share a model of this, I'm going to tell you a story of a mango tree. And this is going to kind of model some of the principles that we'll look at today. So stories are a seed of possibility. So I want to share this story with you. When I was growing up, I lived in Panama. My father is a military service member and in the Army. And so we lived on a small base in Panama. And in this community, unlike the United States kind of civilian communities, you don't get to kind of choose where you live. You live in the same area with members of the same kind of rank as your father. So in my neighborhood, there was this beautiful mango tree that was across the street in a neighbor's yard. And it was filled with mangoes. And every year around the summertime, we would all go and sit in this yard at this tree and collect mangoes and eat them until we were stuffed. And so one day, the family that was living there got orders to move back to the United States. And so a family moved in. And one of the first things that happened when this new family moved in is that they hung a Confederate flag there in their yard, in their garage, actually. And so I knew a little bit about the history because my dad's experience. And when we saw that, we kind of didn't know if we were still welcome to go and eat the mangoes from this tree because of this history. And my father came out of the house and saw this hanging in this yard and the garage. And we kind of watched in silence as he walked across the street and he knocked on our neighbor's door. And so when the neighbor opened the door, we kind of all waited with bated breath. And my dad said, do you want to come and play basketball with us? Some of the guys and I would go and play basketball at the basketball court. Would you like to come? And the neighbor said, of course I would like to come. And so he came and he played with my dad. And over the course of the summer, my dad played football and they had talks and they had conversation. And before even a month into summer, the Confederate flag came down and conversations continued and play continued. And we were welcome at this tree, but we also were able to learn something from this exchange. I was able to learn the power of belonging and bridging from my father. So one of the things I want us to think about is, what are the stories of bridging and belonging that your children see in your practice and in your habits that they can take with them? Even though this happened more than 30 some years ago, I never forgot that image of my father creating that experience with this neighbor and looking for the humanity and the connection in unexpected places. And so one of the things we want to think about, and you can share this in the chat, is one value or trait that you hope to transmit to your child or to your children so that they are able to help create a more just and equitable world. And so I'll just pause briefly for you to think about that one value or trait that you hope to transmit to your child or children so that they're able to create a more just and equitable world. And in a few minutes, I'll pause and pivot and invite some of our librarians to share with me some of the things that emerge from that chat. So first, we're going to start at the research, and then I'm going to pivot into the story. So we're going to take a quick and it's going to be a lot of information, but I want you to just experience it. You'll have a recording of this that will be shared. So, don't feel like you have to write a lot of notes right now. Just sort of experience this information so that you can be present as we go through and talk about it. So when we think about the research around babies, we know that infants as young as 6 months show a preference for members of their own race, and they show a preference for the faces, and they recognize the faces better from folks who resemble their caregivers. And so we know that at 6 months of age, they have also this preference for folks who speak the same language as their caregivers. So children, especially babies, have an amazing ability to recognize faces. They even surpass facial recognition technology. When they're very young, they are examining our faces, they are learning our body language, they are receiving a lot of information from studying us. So we want to think of young children not as kind of not having a lot of context of their own, but you want to think of babies and young children as social scientists. And this will really help your lens around what you model for young children when you carry this. I'm going to share this bit of research that comes from the science and parenting writer for the Washington Post, Melissa Werner Moyer. And she shares one of the biggest misconceptions that white parents have is that their children don't notice race unless it's pointed out to them. The underlying assumption is that children only become racist if they're taught to be that, when in fact, research clearly shows the opposite. Kids develop racial prejudice unless their parents or teachers directly engage with them about it, because there is a system at play of in-group bias and in-group preference and out-group bias. And we'll talk a little bit about how this shows up in research across for young children. So this research is panned out from the United States, the UK, France, China, all show this demonstrable preference for people who resemble the caregivers that they have for young children. And what's interesting is that research also now shows that for preschoolers, 4.5-year-olds, this is really rapidly sort of absorbed. So Andrew Metzkoff has published 2 studies that show how observational social learning can also serve as this mechanism for intergenerational transmission of racial bias. So let's talk a little bit about what they did in the study. They took preschool students, they showed them a video of an adult sitting in the center, and all the adult did was turn to one side to one person in a dark shirt and said, "Hi." And they said it with kind of with a tone, without a lot of tone in their voice, without a lot of warmth in their voice. It was kind of cold and rejecting, but it was simply "Hi." They were kind of scowling, they were kind of leaning away, and they kind of had a reluctance to interact. And then when they turned to the other person on the screen who was wearing a red shirt, they said hi, but they said it in a way that was very warm, smiling, warm tone of voice. They leaned in with an eagerness to interact. And what they found was that of these preschoolers, a majority of the preschoolers then recognized that person. And when they asked them, which one of these individuals do you like? The majority chose the one that was received with a positive affect. And so when they did this study, what they found consistently for the preschoolers is that they not only chose the person who received the warmth, but when they sent the children in the hallway to pick from a number of, I think, 18 adults to be a helper, the children consistently also chose those individuals who resembled the person with the red shirt. So they picked the people who are wearing the same color shirt and showed the same bias. And so what they saw from this study is that children systemically point to the person that received the positive signal, and that when they were they spread that bias, and they were readily able to adopt the bias that the adults had directed towards others. So who we communicate with and how we communicate with them is also being absorbed by children. So when we think about a simple hello and how we say that, children are drawing inferences from those even small interactions. And so now let's think about some research that comes out of the study. That was a national study that was done. Sesame Street did this, looking at identity matters, and they surveyed 6,070 parents of children ages 3 to 12. And then they also surveyed 1,046 educators of children from preschool to 5th grade. And so they did these surveys with them, and I just pulled out some highlights, but I highly recommend that you kind of look into what Sesame Street is doing. It's really phenomenal. And so when they asked the children, they asked, do you think people of different races are treated fairly in this country? And 86% said no. So young children, whether we are talking with them about race and identity or not, these children were easily able and overwhelmingly able to say there is bias exists. And so when they did also looked at, besides gender, they asked how often parents talk to their children about social identities. So when we look at here on the right in the green, those are all never. So like when we think about not talking about country of origin, not talking about family makeup, not talking about race and identity, and not talking about social class. And then when you lump in both rarely and never, and then sometimes you see that it's not a lot of parents, are talking about this with children often and across many different kinds of identities, so that children can really begin to understand what it looks like to see differences, to see different family structures, to see different kinds of people from different nationalities, different cultures, different religions. And so it's no wonder that when children looking across those identities, when they talk to parents about their children, have their children shared that they've heard a negative comment about their identities. And these parents have then thought about, how do I talk to my children and support them in those identities? So, we can see that 70%, when we think about intersectionality, some children are hearing a negative comment about both their religion and their identity, or their family structure, their family makeup, and their country of origin. So you'll see that 70% has heard something negative about their identity and through religion. For gender, 61%, family makeup, 65%, 64% of country of origin, 60% for race and identity, and then 60% for social class. So when children are in these school environments, preschool environments, in their homes, this is also, have they heard a comment about those identities, and then thinking about how many other children have witnessed that. How many of these other children in the classroom have also seen this kind of interaction and then drawn inferences because of that? And so it's just another reminder of how powerful and how important it is to talk to our children in advance of them just absorbing the culture of their classroom, the culture of the community. We want them to be actively engaged in considering what is being stated, what is being said, and how is this making people feel around me, or how is this also impacting me and my own self-concept, my own self-identity. So when we think about those parents whose children have heard a negative comment about their identity, they say their children are more aware that they may be different from others compared to those who have not heard a negative comment. So these children then become aware that this part of my identity is something that could be targeted, that people might not accept in me. I might not be feel like I belong in a community based on some of the things that are said. And so this is just to give us a snapshot of what children are experiencing and to remind us as caregivers, as educators, as parents that care, how important it is for us to think about their experiences and how we can resource them and how can we ensure they have the tools they need. So we know that the United States has passed this threshold where we know more than 50% of children in America are children who are children of color. And so we want, and then the states that you see highlighted in purple are those states where children of color already outnumber children who are white. And so the likelihood that children are going to be working and living and going to school and making a lot of friends and contacts and with people from a wide range of identities and backgrounds is really high. So we want to make sure that our children are equipped with how to act in anti-biased ways, how to nurture belonging, how to have cross-cultural friendships, and how to build and engage in the bridging. And so this is not easy because this is not a practice that many of our adults in our communities are living out in their own ways. And so this study I find is really interesting. And in 2013, the American Values Survey looked at the diversity of social networks among Americans. And this was I know that 2013, it's a little dated, but it still holds, and they haven't put out a new study exactly like it. So I think it's something we can still look at to say. So when we look at the social networks of people in the United States, here on the top, you'll see that the average white American has one Black friend, one Latino friend, one Asian friend, one mixed race friend, and one friend of another race. But predominance, 91 out of 100 of their friends resemble their own identities, okay? And so then when we look at Black Americans, we see that they have roughly 8 times the number of white friends, double the number of Latino friends, but also, you know, not having Asian in this study, not having Asian friends, but having mixed race friends. And so when we think about our social networks as parents tend to mirror our own identities, our own racial identities and cultural identities. So we see this need in America for us to think about how do we begin to do this bridging and belonging, and how this shows up in our social networks, and therefore how this shows up in our children's lives. So our children may, when you think about the in-group bias that in the preference they have toward their own caregivers, their own identities, their own languages, we want to think about how are we modeling these habits and practices for our children in ways that are authentic and powerful. So let's go ahead and look at the cost and the risk of what happens when we are not engaging and supporting in this way. So one is the pain of othering and exclusion. So we know that implicit bias and in-group bias and association can definitely have an impact on children. And so in this research that has been done on the relational neurophysiology and brain science of social exclusion, we see that the pain of othering is felt in the bodies of our children. They actually have a physiological response to this when they are othered. So when they experience bullying, when they experience othering, this shows up in the bodies of our children. So they process pain through the same neural pathways that register distress when it's also when it's both. So I have a visitor in my room right now. So we see that that is processed the same pathways that register distress. So we want to make sure that we are thinking about how this is impacting the health and well-being of children from many different backgrounds. And so we know that 40% of African Americans have high blood pressure, and that this also, when you think about higher rates of diabetes and other ways that the body has started to hold and process the stress of othering and of being kind of marginalized, we want to think about, the importance of doing this work so that children are healthy, that all children are able to enjoy and experience belonging across their identities. So I'm going to pivot, and we're going to look at ways to disrupt bias and ways we can model and ensure that our children across our communities are experiencing belonging. So one thing that's really important for all children of all ages and all of us is to recognize that we are part of the human family. We have different skin color, hair color, eye color. We have different genders, different families. We like different things. We have different gifts. We have different needs, but we all want to be safe. We all want to be free. We all want to be treated fairly and with respect. We all belong together in this community, and we are all on this beautiful planet that we call home. And so ways that we can think about bias, there's this great Embrace Race and Children's Community School has put together this wonderful kind of synopsis of research from a lot of different studies, and they kind of show us at what age and what developmental milestone we can begin to disrupt bias and how. So when we think about our very youngest babies and our zero birth to year, having pictures of real faces, pictures of the human family, for children so that they can see all of the variety of physical attributes, physical faces, and then exposure to and being in spaces where they can see presenters of different backgrounds, people of different backgrounds. When we think about the read aloud stories that we have for our 2-year-olds and highlighting and noticing different skin color, different eye color, different hair color, and noticing all of those differences and celebrating that. So remember, just the same way that children are reading that body language and the affect that we have, nurturing that celebration of difference and honoring difference and noticing difference and asking them the kind of differences they notice as well. That can be continued through 2.5, but also thinking about, the ways that we group children. So a lot of times when 2.5 or toddlers, we say, go ahead and choose a table. And they're immediately going to start looking at other kids to see which children who are most similar to themselves, what table they're choosing. So I would really recommend that you also think about different groupings. So find someone who's maybe the same height as you, who has the same color shoes as you, who maybe has the same color shirt as you, and then mixing students and grouping them differently so they have more chances to interact with someone and see a commonality that they might not have seen previously. And then when we think about 4 and 5-year-olds, we kind of hit this peak of this understanding. Children have absorbed a lot of messages now at 4 and 5 years old around identity and groupings. And so here we really want to talk about bias. We really want to talk to them about, what does it look like to welcome everyone? What does it look like to have a language for bias and belonging? And so in stories, I'll highlight with this group, what was done to make a child feel welcome in a story? What was done to make a child feel unwelcome in a story? What we call that bias. We call that bias when we don't know a person, but we make a judgment about them based on how they look or their families or their orientations or their gender expression. So we can really do a lot with our 4 and 5 years old just to talk about some of these equity and what it looks like to have fairness. They have children have such a strong awareness of fairness. And so we want to capitalize on that. We also know that we have different needs for different identities. So for our children who are Black and Latinx, who might not be internalizing a very positive self-concept, we see that there can be negative self-concepts, there can be negative internalization of some of the bias in media, bias in literature, not seeing themselves represented as positive characters. So here we really want to think about, how am I leveraging to support a healthy self-concept and a healthy self-identity for children who are, hitting those school years. And then thinking about, what is the work that I as a parent can model with other parents and other caregivers? How can I be an ambassador for books and stories to be in the classroom of my child and in the school? How am I advocating for events that are inclusive? So just thinking about our own responsibility as parents and caregivers, and then talking about too, how are we modeling some of those interracial, cross-cultural friendships, and how are we giving them opportunities to do the same? So maybe it's thinking about, hosting if your child already loves football, or already loves, certain sport, or already loves a certain kind of hobby, then creating spaces where you are actively, inviting them to be more inclusive. So you might notice that the gymnastics group that you take your child to doesn't have a lot of diversity. Maybe talking with and asking, can we put flyers in different places so we can bring children from different communities? How can we make this space more inclusive so that my child can make more friendships across identities with children who have shared interests? So I'm going to kind of move us through, since I went through all three on the bottom, just so that we have some time to look at some books that can really help us to do this work. So one of my favorite books, and you can use this book, I use this book from, toddlers all the way to adults. I use this work in facilitating workshops, is All the Colors We Are. This really is phenomenal because it has so many real photographs of different people and faces and identities. And then it helps children to build their language around this. And it also helps adults to build our language around this. So in this story, what it offers us is a great map that shows that, where our ancestors come from has a lot to do with the melanin that we have in our skin. And so if your family came from a place that was very close to the sun, they had more melanin to protect them from the rays of the sun. So you see that equator, you see that, if you're from different parts of Africa and Central America and South America, you probably have a deeper hue of skin color because of your melanin to protect you from the sun. Whereas if you come from somewhere, Northern Europe, Northern United States, right up there, in the northern parts of the world, you might not have as much melanin because you were further from the sun and you did not need that. So where skin color comes both from our ancestors and our heritage, but also it comes from whether or not we're out in the sun and we have our melanin is being activated. So lots of languages in this book and a lot of opportunity to have discussions. But even with a young child, you can go through the pictures and the map and just talk about some of these themes with them. I Am Brown is a beautiful story that I love because when we think about where people come from, we can't tell where a person with brown skin comes from just by looking at their skin. They might be coming from Africa, Europe, Asia, South America, North America, we don't know. So this story is a beautiful example of how we can talk about race and identity and culture, but also talking about skin color and what brown skin, can come from anywhere across the globe because by your parents, whether or not our ancestors come from this place, whether or not we've moved to a place. And so we really want to get an opportunity to talk to our children about getting to know someone is asking them where they're from and not assuming that we know where a child is from. I want to talk also about this beautiful story, Curls and Glow. And these are by the same author, Ruth Foreman. And what's really lovely about this story is it shows a range of hues, but it also talks about hair. And when we think about bias can, when we see all ranges of human difference, some of those are a catapult for us to other someone. So hair, we've seen just nationally, has been something that has come up in news stories where, there have been folks who've had their hair cut. A young wrestler had his hair cut on the side of during a match. We've had folks not be allowed to graduate and walk in their graduation ceremonies because they had braids. We've had situations where, folks have experienced job discrimination because of the way they wear their hair. So though these are two very small board books, these are a great conversation starter to talk about all of our different kinds of hair, how we wear our hair, and celebrating the differences in our hair. So I just want to offer that, when we see something coming up as a place where we see bias emerging in the news or and so we want to lean in on that and use that in our story time and use that with our children to say, everyone has different kinds of hair, everyone has different textures of hair, and all hair is beautiful because hair is, when it comes out of our scalp, it grows. And then hair also is something that protects us from getting a lot of rays of sun on our heads. And so all hair has just so many beautiful qualities that we can celebrate. And so when, I love to talk about one of the stories I love to use with children is Bedtime Bonnet. This story is a great book that you can talk about different hair color, eye color, skin color, hair texture. You can also positively affirm characters using these micro affirmations that celebrate those cultural and racial identities. So, and you can talk about the fact that many families have many different skin tones and hues reflected in their family. So you can ask children what's similar, to our family, what's similar to, a friend's family, and then what is different. And so I'm just showing one of the pages that I love in this story. And so in this story, the little girl's getting ready for bed and she needs her bedtime bonnet. And so it's talking about all of the different practices that her family members have for their hair. So I'll just read a little bit. Daddy's hairbrush makes rows of black waves appear. Grandma rolls up her silver mane. Grandpa doesn't do anything to his hair because he doesn't have any. And after mommy gathers her corkscrew curls in a scarf she calls for me, I scoot between her legs and she gets to work on my hair. I'm tender-headed, so she's extra gentle. And here we can celebrate that I see this beautiful family and I see all of the different shades of brown in their family. And I also see the different kinds of hair. I see that Papa doesn't have hair. Does your Papa have hair? Our Papa, my dad actually has a little bit of hair going around in a little halo, we call it, because it's like his angel halo. And so we can talk about in this family, you notice everyone's getting ready for bed. So now we also see that Grandma and Papa might live in the house with our main character. And so we can celebrate that in some houses, in some families, grandparents live with the family. And what a blessing that is to be able to hear Grandma and Papa's stories, or to be able to go and visit them, or to be able to have them make meals. And so we're also talking about family structure, that some families have extended family members who live with them and are able to do so much to pass on their stories, their traditions. And so we want to celebrate that. Another story that I love to use all across the gambit of ages is When Aiden Became a Brother. And this story is about a child who is exploring their gender identity, and it shows the powerful way that children can advocate for themselves. And so I'll read you a little bit and we'll talk about the models of advocacy the story has in it. When Aiden was born, everyone thought he was a girl. His parents gave him a pretty name. His room looked like a girl's room. He wore clothes like the other girls liked. And it was hard to tell his parents what he knew about himself, but it was even harder not to. It took everyone some time to adjust, and they learned a lot from other families with transgender kids like him. And so in this story, the story is about how Aiden advocates for Aiden's new sibling. Mother is pregnant, Aiden's going to become a brother, and Aiden really wants their sibling to be able to have their own identity without it being assigned to them. So this is a beautiful story that celebrates that all families want to be safe. all children and families want to be able to express themselves as who they are authentically. And so this is a beautiful story. It's one of my favorite books to celebrate identity, but also advocacy, standing up for oneself and advocating for someone else. And you can point that out easily through this story as Aiden goes through and they go shopping and they do these works. It's really important to highlight that people have a right to be safe, and everyone has a right to express themselves. And so listen to, and you can use little parts of the story to say, I love how Aiden is standing out for their sibling. I love how Aiden is standing up for themselves. And so another story that is a beautiful book to use with children and to talk about hair is this one called My Hair, written by Hannah Lee. And it says, off we go to the hairdressers to get it done professionally. As for what style I choose, you'll have to wait and see. But you'll see all of these different hair, these different, expressions of folks, of themselves. And so you can talk about and celebrate that, hair is something that makes us so special, and everyone has, we want to celebrate all the different ways that people wear their hair and honor that. We want to honor each other. Another beautiful story that I love to read aloud is The Cot in the Living Room by Hilda Eunice Burgos. And so in this story, we're talking about, what does it look like to be a support in your community for people who need support and help. And so in this family, they have a cot that's in the living room, and they sort of make it available to people in their community. And everyone has a different reason for needing the cot. But in this story, Raquel really wants to sleep in the cot herself. And she thinks it's kind of like, when am I going to get my turn to sleep in the cot? So Raquel's dad is working the night shift at the hospital, so she gets to sleep on the cot in the living room. So in this one, we see that, Raquel's father is going to work, he's got to work late, and we don't know, Raquel's mother, she might be working or she might not be, we don't know. And so Raquel gets to come, and you see Raquel is so happy. She's going to get to come and stay on the cot in the living room. She'll have a place that's safe. And this talks about how folks who are working different kinds of jobs might need different kind of help from time to time. And that all children, they want to have fun, and they want to go somewhere and be somewhere safe where they can relax and rest. And that might be a neighbor's house, that might be a cousin's house. And so Poppy says, do you like dominoes? Yes, we can make a maze. Poppy never lets me build with the good dominoes. What is the good dominoes, versus the not so good dominoes? And so this is a great opportunity to talk to children about how different families help the community and how they help other people who might be their neighbors. And maybe that's something that your family does. Maybe your family helps neighbors by picking up another child from, after school, because that you provide, some after school support, and they come and play at the house before their parents get off work. And this talks about the social class. It talks about, working families, what they need, and it gives them a foundation for thinking about, how do I help others, and how do I, and Raquel eventually gets, her own night in the cot in the living room. But great story that celebrates and affirms that helping each other across the community is a beautiful expression of community collective care. See You Soon, written by Marim Kaleem. This one is a story, and I have it here. What I love about this book is that this is a story that we don't, there's a lack of representation for students who are children who have experienced a parent being incarcerated. And so in this story, this child's mother is going to be leaving to go and to be away from her family for a while, as she is going to be incarcerated. And so the story has beautiful illustrations about how this family, the mother loves her child so much and is so, wants her to understand that just because she's going to be away does not mean she doesn't love her daughter. And so this is a book that you really want to talk to kids about. Sometimes there could be someone in their class, someone in their community whose parent might not be there for a while, but that love is still there and love is present in those families. And that when, this family is reunited at some point, that they'll also be able to be together, and that families should have that opportunity to continue to visit one another, to continue to call one another, and to show their love for one another, you know. And so in this story, she's going to be with her grandmother for a little while, again, showing family structures and how families support one another, and all families want to be supported, and all you know, children want to be able to be safe and loved. If they cannot be with their parent, being with someone else who keeps them safe and loves them. So a way for you to talk about the importance of love and being there for one another, even if situations and circumstances mean that a parent might not be as available at that time. So Becoming Vanessa is a story that is incredible story. I highly recommend it as a read aloud because Vanessa Bradley Newton, who is the author, this is a story that is inspired by how Vanessa also got her name. And so in this story, Becoming Vanessa, it's preschool, it's the first day of school. Vanessa gets to go out and is so excited to express herself. She wants to wear everything sparkly and just shine. But when she gets to school, some things that are said, some ways that she's treated make her feel small. And when she comes home, she says, you know, I don't want to wear my sparkly cowboy boots. I don't want to wear these, you know, things sparkling in my hair. I don't want the name Vanessa. And her mother says, oh, Vanessa, let me tell you why I gave you this name. And it is a beautiful story that really affirms Vanessa's identity. And so when we think about how students can internalize a negative self-concept when they're absorbing negative messages about their identity, this is a great book that will disrupt that for children. The same thing with Eyes That Kiss in the Corners, about a little girl who goes to school and someone makes mention of her eyes and why are her eyes kind of shaped the way they are. And so she goes home to her family and receives all the affirmation and self-love that she needs. I also will highlight First Laugh Welcome Baby, another incredible story that shows in the Navajo tradition, the whoever makes the baby laugh first has a special place and a special role in that child's life for the rest of their life. And so everyone in the story is trying to make the baby laugh first. And so a great way to introduce your children to other traditions and practices that honor babies, and also to give them some idea on First Nation culture and the Navajo traditions, so that they can learn and learn about the ways that all families want to be loved and all families want to laugh and they want to have good times and to be celebrated. I also say Global Babies, another picture board book that shows many different faces and helps children to see a lot of the range of human difference. A is for Activist is another book that I love. It's a board book, and this one shows activists of all ages with their signs. And I love this one. These two children are holding up signs. Girls should be treated fairly. Women are important. And so this gives children an idea that, you know, we can use our voice to stand up for things we care about, to stand up for people in our communities that we care about. And so we want to celebrate and affirm, you know, all of our different ways of being upstanders and being anti-biased, you know, justice promoters and activists. And so I will just pause real quick, and this in the chat, if you want to share one idea, one practice that you're kind of walking away with tonight. I want to have time for questions and so forth. So I'm going to leave around 15 minutes at the end, and I just want you to think about what's one idea, what's one practice that's resonating for you. Maybe it's something that came out of the research that surprised you. Maybe it's something that you think, oh, this is, you know, something my child experienced this year or last year, and I now see that, you know, I want to make sure that we're talking about this in some of the stories that we're reading, or so whichever. But in the chat, if you'd like to share one idea or practice that you're walking away with. And I'll just kind of end with this idea for tips for, you know, our parents and caregivers on the call tonight, is that we can increase the stories and books and media that reflect racial groups in affirming ways. And so really being thoughtful about what children are absorbing, because I said earlier, they are social scientists, so they're watching and observing our minor and micro interactions as much as they are television, media, TV shows, and movies. Talk about race and racial groups in ways that celebrate their identities. The more you talk about human difference, the more children understand that people may look different, but inside we all want the same care and support. And then thinking about your circle, building more inclusive social circles, and helping children to have more contact and cross-group friendships with children with similar interests. Children, they want to connect. They want to, explore the things that they care about and what they're interested in. And we can really be ambassadors for inclusion by, helping to create more cross-cultural and inclusive spaces through our sports teams, through our dance teams, through our, I do outdoor education. I mean, we can really be engaged as community members to help spaces become more inclusive using our voices as well. I also just want to share some of the folks that I love to follow on Instagram is Here We Read. I'll drop this into the chat. Read Your World. There's another one, White Girl Learning. This is a great one for parents to find other books that they might want to bring in and read for themselves. And then the Brown Bookshelf team. So I'll just put those into the chat. And then I'll also, see, and the chat has been busy. I need to catch up on the chat, and I will also drop one other link. It's just a LibGuide, but this one is so rich and it has so many different resources. So that's just something I just want to make sure you have access to as well after we end the call. And just to think about some quotes, there's when we think about our hopes and dreams for this generation to be able to experience belonging and community and inclusion and the collective care for one another, I think we need to really stay focused on that vision that we have, and that tonight we've exchanged seeds, right? And at the same time, a seed doesn't grow unless we water it, we nurture it, we care for it. So I hope that you will take tonight's session as a seed of infinite possibility, that you are going to grow different habits and practices from it, and these will be transmitted to our children. And so one quote is that beloved community is formed not by the eradication of difference, but by its affirmation. Each of us, sorry, there's a typo, claiming the identities and cultural legacies that shape who we are and how we all live in the world. And then anti-racist person is on a lifelong journey that includes forming new understandings of and ways to live his or her racial identity and increasing commitment to and engagement in anti-racist actions. And Louise Derman Sparks is a veteran of this, so I hope that you also look into some of her work and writings as well. So I will stop there so that we have about 13 minutes for the chat for questions. So I will stop sharing.
Well, Janet, we do have some, I wanted to tell you what kinds of things we have shared in the chat. You're right, it has been very active, people sharing other book options and suggestions too, based, similar to what you've shared. And we do have one question too, but let me share responses to your last question about what messages, what things people want to take away and use. One we have is, my children are interracial, and I did not know the physical impact that social exclusion can have. I have seen some of this on my 9-year-old daughter. I always remind her that she is a beautiful, smart, and powerful queen. I will be more aware in general now.
Wonderful, absolutely.
Another one is, I want to make sure my children have a very positive opinion or feelings about their race, language, family traditions, and culture. And one person said, I'm wanting to talk in general about celebrating differences. I'm going to be more aware of discussing social identity with children. I was helped by thinking of some other ways of thinking about that with family makeup and the social class, as well as the others. I'm going to encourage my daughter to find new people to sit with or talk to based on shirt color. Love that.
Yes.
Let me just scrolling quickly down. Okay, so I see some other questions too. The first question though we got, if I have to find it again. Any words to share with my mixed son who is told by his Black friends that he is Black? He's proud to be mixed, and I tell him that only he can define himself. But what's a good thing for him to say to people who want to put him in a box?
I think going back to where she noticed where you noticed your child's pride sits. So if they have internalized an identity that is biracial, then teaching them that, I am biracial. I am both. I am not one and not the other, right? I am both. I am the heritage and the culture of my parents, and I'm proudly biracial. And this will come up, and letting them know that because another person has said, well, I think you should identify as Black, they can say, well, thank you for sharing that, but for me, in the way that I live my life, I just feel like, for myself, I identify as biracial, and I'm proud of the culture of both of my parents, and so sometimes that comes from a place where, historically there was this one drop rule where, that has kind of been passed down, this idea that you kind of have a lived experience that was shaped by also legal ramifications of having, a parent who was Black. And so there's a lot to untangle in that, but teaching our children to be proud of their identities and helping them understand they claim those identities for themselves, and that they are something that is also fluid. There's a degree to which in some spaces, your child may experience, over the course of their life, experience places where they feel especially rooted in the Black experience. And there's other spaces where they feel especially rooted in, their intersectional identities. So just letting them know that it is always there, they have sovereignty on that, on how they feel and their self-concept is around race.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
to the Berlin family. Racial identity does change.
Another question that we have is, hang on a second. I lost it. There were two other questions, I think.
I have it.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Betsy.
I have gone out of my way to be welcoming to everyone at the library. After I talk to a family for a while, I might ask them where they are from because they have an accent or other clues that indicate they are from another part of the world. Is that rude of me? Sometimes they say they are American, just like me.
So I would say this is where we get into the nuance. And so genuine interest might be that, there's a difference between interest and curiosity. So I would say if it's coming from a place where you're kind of curious to know a person's background, that's a bit different from, I'm really interested in learning more about you. Can you tell me a little bit about your culture or your background? I hear a little bit of an accent. I'm just really would love to I'm interested in knowing, where you're from, and then letting them know the why. I'm interested in knowing where you're from because I really want to offer some more services for families that are in our community, or I've never seen you here before, and I really want to make sure we have a welcoming space. That goes a long way when we share our intent. And I'm a biracial, I'm Black and Korean, and I would get people asking me all the time, like in a grocery, like, are you Hawaiian? Or someone telling me like, I know, I think I can guess it. If you just give me enough time, I could probably put my finger on it. So we really want to show genuine interest, but if it's a curiosity, and that's where we kind of get into, I want to just touch your hair because I'm curious of what it feels like, or that can feel very invasive. So we want to make sure that we're honoring and coming from a place of interest and not necessarily just curiosity.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There's another one in the chat. I'm Black American. My partner is Guatemalan American. We want to seek activities with my child that include many races, cultures, and experiences. I'm wondering if leaning into free activities and away from paid groups could help with that. I think it would help with class awareness, but I'm a little lost about race, specifically engaging with Asian Americans, Indigenous Americans, and other Latino Americans.
I would say 2 or 3 things. So one is that you're right. It's some things can, depending on their cost, can be prohibitive, and also thinking about certain communities, that don't feel as inclusive as others. So what I would really say is a place where I think there's a great opportunity is to think about the parts of the city where you attend events, and thinking about, for myself personally, I wrote a festival blog for a very long time, and I would take my children to cultural festivals of many different backgrounds. And that was like an entry point for me to learn and talk to them about food and culture and heritage and celebrating. And they could see me then as a parent model this joy for and this interest in the culture and heritage of these communities. And so my children attended probably, easily 200 or 300 festivals with me. And I would highly recommend Cleo Parker Robinson has great dance classes. They have events, getting to know the 5 Points community. They have a lot of different, Brother Jeff has they do like Black Dollar Saturdays. And so it's a place where vendors and small businesses, and that's a great way to support women-owned businesses. I just met the lead of Asian Girls Ignite, which is a STEM organization for young girls of Asian descent, and they're hosting a night market. So it does require some, and it's all vendors who are young business starters. And so they have all women-owned businesses that'll be present. So it does require to some degree a level of that's that watering of the seeds, where you're curating these experiences for your children, because as we looked at the data, these are not things that are really happening widespread for us to be able to access. So I would just highly recommend some of those places that will be springboards to even more events, and also just looking for those festivals and those events. They come up at the Dragon Boat Festival, I think, is going to be happening this month. That's a great opportunity. You mentioned the Asian community, and then also the Friendship Powwow that they have at the Denver Art Museum is a great way to, so there's a ton of wonderful festivals that can also help with that.
We're lucky to live in a city that has a lot of these.
Yes,
we did have a follow-up from Paige. My kids have that conversation. She's referring to getting asked, I can figure out who you are. They've gotten so many guesses about their identities, heritage, and the response combines laughter and some rolled eyes. I just listened to them share this experience with each other, and I wonder if I should do more to empower them to respond.
So I think you're taking a cue. Remember, we're listening to the children as much as they are listening to us. And if they're exhibiting comfort and they have found their way of navigating that, we want to encourage and honor that they are solution creators themselves. And so there's a Korean saying that my mother used to tell us, don't tie your children's shoes while they're here, because when you're in heaven, they'll ask you to untie them. So we want them to have a level of independence and letting them know to trust their gut. When they feel something is disrespectful, that's a different conversation to have with them, to follow up and say, how did that make you feel? And then talking with them and role playing. I highly recommend playing out different experiences for children that, what would you do if someone you cared about, your friend, is getting bullied because of their identity? So let's say they come home and they say, I'm thinking about my daughters. They came home and said, there was a young girl who is of a darker skin tone, and another young boy who was also African-American was bullying her and calling her, extremely dark-skinned and so forth. So I asked, what did you do? What did you do to give care? And so my daughter said, oh no, I went right to her. I said, you are beautiful, just giving those affirmations in that moment of need. And so great conversations and great ways to listen deeply to our children so that they can kind of co-create those solutions with us. Thank you for putting all of those links into the chat. I know we have about 2 minutes left. I don't know if there's another question or if we want to close.
Well, while we're waiting to see if anyone has another question, I'd just like to thank you for being with us again. I always learn something new, and so useful for all of our audience, I hope. Thanks to everyone for being here. Look for an email in the next few days. Janet graciously has allowed us to record this program, and so we'll have a link available on our website. And we'll also have the book list and a list of the links to the various organizations that were talked about tonight. I'd also like to promote our early literacy speaker event coming up September 8th. We'll have the author of Parent Nation and 30 Million Words, Dr. Dana talk to, now I'm going to forget her name. But Suskind, that's it,
Suskind.
Dr. Dana Suskind. Yes, she'll be with us on September 8th. So thank you very much for being here, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you. Good night. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Janet.